Emily Rodriguez had always believed that some people were born to lead, while others were destined to follow. At 26, she had perfectly mastered the art of invisibility, blending into office walls, nodding at every unreasonable request, and swallowing her words before they could escape her lips. Working as a receptionist at Pinnacle Marketing, she had become an expert at being overlooked, undervalued, and utterly replaceable. But sometimes, the most ordinary people find themselves at the center of extraordinary moments. Sometimes a single decision can unravel everything you thought you knew about yourself and everyone around you.
Quick pause. Before we continue, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? If you're enjoying these stories, make sure to hit subscribe because tomorrow's episode is absolutely mind-blowing.
The fluorescent lights of Pinnacle Marketing buzzed overhead as Emily Rodriguez straightened the visitor badges for the third time that morning. Her desk sat like an island in the middle of the lobby, perfectly positioned to greet clients while remaining strategically invisible to the executives who hurried past her daily. She had arranged her workspace with military precision, staplers aligned, phone positioned at the exact angle for optimal reach, and a small succulent plant that somehow managed to survive despite the building's artificial lighting. Emily had been the receptionist at this mid-sized digital marketing firm for exactly 27 months and 14 days. Not that she was counting, but her meticulous nature meant she automatically tracked these details. She knew every employee's coffee preference, every client's preferred meeting room temperature, and exactly how long each person took in the bathroom. Information that proved surprisingly useful in managing the office's intricate social ecosystem. Marcus Thompson, her direct supervisor and the company's creative director, approached her desk with his usual air of hurried importance. At 42, Marcus had perfected the look of someone perpetually overwhelmed by his own brilliance. Designer glasses slightly askew, carefully tousled hair, and an expression that suggested the weight of the creative world rested entirely on his shoulders. "Emily, I need you to handle the Henderson Industries social media post this week," Marcus announced without looking up from his phone. "Just basic stuff, Instagram stories, Facebook updates, nothing too creative." Emily felt the familiar knot form in her stomach. The Henderson account was substantial, requiring strategic planning and brand voice consistency, work that typically fell under the junior marketing coordinator's responsibilities. Yet somehow, these tasks kept migrating to her desk, disguised as simple administrative work that conveniently never appeared on her official job description or paycheck. "Of course, Mr. Thompson. Should I coordinate with Sarah and marketing for brand guidelines?" Marcus finally glanced at her, his expression suggesting she had asked whether water was wet. "Emily, you've been here long enough to handle basic social media. Henderson likes consistency. Just keep doing what you've been doing." What she'd been doing, Emily reflected, was essentially managing 3 different client social media accounts while her official title remained receptionist/administrative assistant. Her salary reflected the latter, while her workload increasingly resembled the former. But every time she considered addressing this discrepancy, she remembered her modest savings account, her student loans, and the stack of rejection letters from other companies that seemed to view her resume as evidence of professional stagnation rather than dedication. The morning progressed with its usual rhythm of redirected calls, scheduled meetings, and the endless stream of tasks that somehow became her responsibility. Emily handled each request with efficient confidence, maintaining the pleasant demeanor that had made her indispensable, while simultaneously rendering her invisible. Around 11:30, the elevator chimed, and Emily looked up to see an unfamiliar woman emerge. She appeared to be in her late 30s, carrying a worn leather portfolio and wearing clothes that spoke of careful budgeting, professional but not expensive, well-maintained but showing signs of wear. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she moved with the cautious confidence of someone who had learned to present strength even when feeling uncertain. "Good morning," the woman said, approaching Emily's desk. "I'm Grace Park. I have an appointment with Marcus Thompson at noon." Emily consulted her meticulously maintained calendar, a physical planner she used alongside the digital system because Marcus had a habit of scheduling meetings verbally and then forgetting to communicate them. Grace Park's appointment was indeed listed, marked as freelance designer, project discussion. Welcome, Ms. Park. Please have a seat and I'll let Marcus Thompson know you're here. Emily gestured toward the small waiting area, noting how Grace chose the chair closest to the wall, a subtle behavior that suggested someone accustomed to making herself small in professional spaces. As Emily called Marcus's extension, she couldn't help but observe Grace more carefully. There was something about her that seemed familiar, though Emily was certain they had never met. Perhaps it was the way Grace sat with perfect posture while clutching her portfolio just a bit too tightly, or the way she checked her phone and then immediately put it away as if to appear unprofessional. Emily recognized these behaviors because she saw them in herself daily, the constant self-monitoring that came from never quite feeling secure in professional spaces. Marcus appeared precisely at noon, his approach accompanied by his signature sound of important footsteps on polished floors. "Ms. Park, Marcus Thompson, Creative Director. Please come up to the conference room." Emily watched them disappear into the elevator, then returned to her work with a nagging sense of unease she couldn't quite identify. Something about the interaction felt significant, though she couldn't pinpoint why. The afternoon brought its usual parade of interrupted tasks and last-minute requests. Emily managed client calls while simultaneously updating website content for 2 different accounts, work that had gradually migrated to her desk through Marcus's talent for creative task delegation. She had become expert at managing multiple complex projects while maintaining the appearance of simply answering phones and scheduling meetings. At 5:30, most of the office began their exodus toward the elevator, clutching coffee cups and chattering about evening plans. Emily remained at her desk, working on a presentation for the Morrison Foods account, another simple administrative task that required her to analyze competitors' social media strategies and develop content recommendations. The presentation was due first thing in the morning, naturally, despite having been assigned at 4:15. As the office grew quiet, Emily allowed herself to work without the constant vigilance required during business hours. She could finally focus completely on the task at hand, letting her genuine analytical skills emerge without fear of appearing to exceed her station. These after-hours moments were when Emily felt most competent, most valuable, most like the professional she had always imagined she could become. The elevator chimed again around 7, and Emily looked up, surprised to see Grace Park emerge. Grace looked around the now empty office with visible confusion. "Oh," Grace said, noticing Emily still at her desk. "I thought I left my pen upstairs after the meeting. Is that okay if I—" "Of course," Emily replied, reaching for her MasterCard card. "I can escort you up. The conference room should be unlocked, but some areas require card access after hours." They rode in the elevator in comfortable silence, and Emily found herself curious about Grace's meeting with Marcus. In her experience, Marcus's freelancer meetings typically lasted 20 minutes and ended with promises to be in touch soon. Code for, "We'll contact you if we can't find someone cheaper."
In the conference room, Grace quickly located her pen on the table, but instead of heading immediately back to the elevator, she lingered, looking out the window at the city below. "Long day?" Emily asked gently. Grace turned with a rueful smile. "A long year, honestly. I've been freelancing since my agency laid me off 8 months ago, and it's been challenging." Emily recognized the careful language people used when discussing professional struggles. The way challenging could encompass everything from financial terror to existential doubt about one's career choices. Freelancing must offer a lot of flexibility, though, Emily offered, genuinely curious about alternatives to traditional employment. Grace's laugh held no humor. "Flexibility to wonder where your next paycheck is coming from, maybe. I have a 6-year-old daughter, and the uncertainty is—" She trailed off, clearly realizing she was sharing more than intended with a stranger. Emily felt an unexpected surge of connection. That must be incredibly stressful. "It is," Grace admitted. "But today might be a turning point." Mr. Thompson discussed several potential projects. The pay isn't ideal, but consistent work would be life-changing right now. Something in Grace's tone made Emily pay closer attention. In her 2 years of observing Marcus's business practices, she had learned to recognize certain patterns. His meetings with potential freelancers typically followed a predictable script: enthusiasm about their portfolio, vague promises about ongoing work, and rates that somehow always ended up being temporary or starter prices
that never seemed to increase. "What kind of projects?" Emily asked, though she suspected she already knew. Grace's eyes brightened with the first genuine enthusiasm Emily had seen from her all day. Brand identity work for several clients, social media strategy development, some print advertising campaigns. He mentioned it could potentially lead to 15 to 20 hours a week of consistent work. Emily's stomach tightened. She recognized several of those projects, work that she had been gradually absorbing into her own responsibilities over recent months. Marcus had mentioned wanting to streamline operations and bring creative work back in-house, but Emily was now realizing his plan might involve outsourcing her overflow work to freelancers, at rates even lower than her own inadequate salary. That sounds promising, Emily managed, though her mind was racing with implications she was only beginning to understand. As they returned to the elevator, Emily found herself studying Grace more carefully. Here was someone with genuine professional skills and experience, forced into precarious freelance work, and grateful for the opportunity to be potentially exploited by Marcus's predictable business practices. Emily recognized something of herself in Grace's situation: the careful gratitude, the willingness to accept less than ideal terms, the sense that any opportunity was better than none. Back in the lobby, Grace gathered her portfolio and thanked Emily for her help. As she headed toward the building's exit, she paused and turned back. "I know this might sound forward, but would you like to grab coffee sometime? I don't know many people in the city yet, and you seem genuine." Emily felt a flutter of surprise. When was the last time someone had invited me to coffee? When was the last time anyone had seen me as more than a pleasant fixture of the office furniture? "I'd like that," Emily heard herself saying. "There's a diner about 2 blocks from here that's open late. I usually end up there after work anyway." They exchanged numbers, and Grace left with a genuine smile, the first Emily had seen from her all day. As Emily returned to her presentation work, she found her concentration scattered by questions she couldn't quite formulate. Something about the encounter had shifted her perspective, though she couldn't yet identify exactly what had changed. Just when Emily thought she understood her place in the professional world, a chance encounter with Grace would reveal that everything she believed about her job, her boss, and her own capabilities was about to be turned completely upside down.
3 days later, Emily found herself sitting across from Grace in Murphy's Diner, a 24-hour establishment that catered to late-shift workers, insomniacs, and people who needed refuge from their regular lives. The booth's red vinyl seats were cracked but comfortable, and the coffee was strong enough to fuel extended conversations about life's complications. Emily had arrived first, choosing a booth near the back where they could talk without being overheard by the handful of other patrons scattered throughout the diner. She ordered coffee and waited, surprised by her own nervousness. When was the last time she had made a new friend? When was the last time anyone had shown interest in spending time with her outside of work-related necessity? Grace arrived exactly on time, looking more relaxed than she had in the office. She wore jeans and a comfortable sweater, her hair loose around her shoulders, and she moved with less of the careful tension Emily had noticed during their first meeting. "Thank you for suggesting this place," Grace said, sliding into the booth. "I've been living off drive-through coffee for months. It's nice to sit somewhere that feels real." Emily understood exactly what she meant. Murphy's Diner existed outside the artificial world of office politics and professional personas. Here, people could be tired, uncertain, or simply human without judgment. They ordered coffee and pie for Grace, coffee and a sandwich for Emily, and fell into conversation with surprising ease. Grace talked about her daughter Lily, who was starting first grade and had strong opinions about everything from breakfast cereal to homework timing. Emily found herself sharing stories about her college years, her family back in Phoenix, and her growing frustration with feeling professionally invisible. "It's strange," Emily said, stirring sugar into her third cup of coffee. "I know I'm capable of more than what my job description suggests, but somehow I've gotten trapped in this role where everyone sees me as competent enough to handle their overflow work, but not qualified enough to be officially recognized or compensated for it." Grace nodded with obvious recognition. I spent 5 years at my previous agency watching younger, less experienced designers get promoted while I was praised for being reliable and consistent, which apparently translates to good enough to handle the work but not leadership material. What happened? Why did you leave? Grace's expression darkened slightly. The agency went through restructuring, which meant laying off anyone over 35 while bringing in recent graduates they could pay entry-level salaries. They offered me a freelance contract to handle my existing clients at half my previous rate with no job security or benefits. Emily felt a chill of recognition. How many times had she heard Marcus use similar language about restructuring and efficiency improvements? "That's horrible," Emily said. "Did you consider fighting it?" "With what resources?" Grace's laugh was bitter. "Single mothers don't exactly have the luxury of lengthy legal battles. I needed income immediately, so I took on freelance work wherever I could find it. Some months are good, others—" She shrugged eloquently. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, each lost in their own thoughts about professional precariousness and the ways talented people could find themselves marginalized despite their capabilities. "Your meeting with Marcus," Emily said carefully. "How did that go, really?" Grace's face lit up again with cautious optimism. "Better than I expected, honestly. He seemed genuinely interested in my portfolio, and he outlined several ongoing projects that could provide steady work. The rates aren't ideal, about 60% of what I charged before, but consistent income would allow me to plan ahead for the first time in months." Emily felt her stomach tighten with familiar dread. She had learned to recognize Marcus's manipulation tactics, but explaining them to Grace would require admitting knowledge she wasn't supposed to possess. "What kind of projects specifically?" Emily asked, though she suspected she already knew. "Social media management for several accounts, brand development work, some print campaigns." He mentioned the Henderson Industries account particularly. Apparently they're expanding their digital presence and need comprehensive social media strategy development. Emily's coffee suddenly tasted bitter. Henderson Industries was one of the accounts that she had been managing unofficially for the past 3 months. She had developed an entire social media strategy, created content calendars, managed their online engagement, and produced the analytics reports that had impressed the client enough to expand their contract with Pinnacle Marketing. Marcus was planning to outsource her work to Grace at rates that would barely cover the time investment required, while simultaneously continuing to profit from Emily's unpaid labor on other accounts. "That sounds like a significant project," Emily said carefully. "It is. Mr. Thompson explained that they're particularly pleased with their current social media performance, so he wants to build on that success. He showed me some of their recent content, and it's really impressive work. Whoever's been handling their account has a great instinct for brand voice and audience engagement." Emily stared at her coffee, processing the implications. Marcus was not only planning to exploit Grace's desperation for work, but he was also using Emily's successful strategies as selling points without any intention of crediting or compensating her appropriately. "Grace, can I ask you something that might sound strange?" "Of course." "In your experience, when agencies outsource work to freelancers, do they typically provide detailed background information about the client's current strategies and performance?" Grace looked puzzled by the question. "Usually, yes. Understanding what's already working is essential for maintaining consistency and building on success." "Why?" Emily took a deep breath, realizing she was about to cross a line she could never uncross. "Because I think there are some things you should know about those projects before you commit to anything." Over the next hour, Emily found herself revealing information she had never intended to share with anyone. She explained how her role at Pinnacle had gradually expanded far beyond administrative work, how she had been managing multiple client accounts without official recognition, and how Marcus routinely presented her strategic work as his during client meetings. Grace listened with increasing alarm and anger, asking detailed questions that revealed her sophisticated understanding of both project management and workplace exploitation. "Emily, you're describing systematic wage theft. You're performing work that should be compensated at marketing coordinator or junior strategist level, but being paid receptionist wages." "I know," Emily said quietly.
but I need this job. I can't afford to make waves. And he's planning to outsource your current work to me at rates that barely cover basic living expenses while continuing to profit from your unpaid labor on other accounts. I'm sorry, Emily said, miserably. I know you need this work, and I don't want to interfere with your opportunity, but you thought I should know what I'm actually agreeing to. Grace finished. Emily, you probably just saved me from months of undercompensated work that would have prevented me from pursuing better opportunities. Grace leaned back in the booth, processing everything Emily had revealed. Can I ask you something now? Anything. Why are you telling me this? You could have let me take on this work, which would have reduced your own workload. Instead, you're warning me about exploitation that doesn't directly affect you. Emily considered the question seriously. Why had she decided to speak up? For 2 years, she had accepted Marcus's gradual expansion of her responsibilities without complaint. She had watched him take credit for her work without protest. She had absorbed every unreasonable request with professional grace and personal resignation. Because, Emily said slowly, watching you describe those projects with such hope and gratitude reminded me of how I felt when I first started at Pinnacle. Marcus made me believe I was lucky to have any job at all, that my contributions were valuable enough to justify expanded responsibilities, but not valuable enough to justify proper compensation or recognition. She paused, organizing thoughts she had never articulated before. And because I realized that staying silent makes me complicit in a system that exploits people like us. You deserve to make informed decisions about your career, even if that means Marcus has to find someone else to take advantage of. Grace reached across the table and squeezed Emily's hand. Do you realize how courageous what you just did was? Emily felt heat rise in her cheeks. It doesn't feel courageous, it feels terrifying. Courage isn't the absence of fear, Grace said gently. It's doing the right thing despite being afraid. They sat in silence for several minutes, both contemplating the implications of Emily's revelations. Finally, Grace spoke again. I have an idea, but I need to ask you something first. Do you have portfolio examples of the work you've been doing for Marcus? I nodded. I keep copies of everything for my own records. Why? Because I think it's time you started getting proper credit for your capabilities, and I think I might know how we can help each other. As Emily prepared to hear Grace's proposal, she had no idea that her decision to speak up was about to set in motion a series of events that would not only transform both of their careers, but also reveal a shocking connection between them that would change everything she thought she knew about her own past.
Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time. So if you're enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The next morning, Emily arrived at work with a sense of anticipation she hadn't felt in months. Grace's proposal had been both simple and revolutionary. Instead of accepting Marcus's exploitative freelance arrangement, Grace would help Emily build a portfolio that accurately reflected her capabilities. Then, they would approach potential clients together, Grace providing design expertise and Emily offering strategic marketing and client management skills. It was a partnership born from mutual recognition of each other's undervalued talents and a shared refusal to continue accepting professional exploitation. For the first time since starting at Pinnacle, Emily felt like she was moving toward something rather than simply enduring her current situation. However, as Emily organized her desk and prepared for another day of managing multiple client accounts while maintaining the fiction of being just a receptionist, she realized that extricating herself from Pinnacle would be more complicated than simply giving notice. Marcus arrived at 9:15, carrying his usual air of creative urgency and a coffee that cost more than Emily's entire lunch budget. He approached her desk with the kind of smile that Emily had learned to interpret as a warning of incoming additional responsibilities. Emily, excellent news, he announced. Grace Park has agreed to take on several freelance projects for us. I'll need you to coordinate with her on client background information and current strategy documentation. Emily's pulse quickened. Of course, Mr. Thompson. Which accounts will she be handling? Henderson Industries to start, then potentially Morrison Foods and the Clearwater Restaurant Group. She'll be working closely with you to understand our current approach before taking over management of those accounts. Emily's mind raced.
Marcus was describing nearly 60% of the strategic work she currently handled, work he was planning to outsource to Grace at below-market rates while Emily continued managing the remaining accounts at receptionist wages. "Should I prepare transition documents for those accounts?" Emily asked, keeping her voice carefully neutral. "That would be helpful. Also, I want you to set up a meeting with Grace for this afternoon. We should discuss project timelines and deliverables." As Marcus disappeared into his office, Emily felt a mixture of anger and vindication. His casual tone about transition documents revealed how little he understood the complexity of the work she performed. Creating comprehensive transition documentation for 3 major accounts would require days of work he expected her to complete while maintaining all her other responsibilities. Emily reached for her phone and sent Grace a carefully worded text. "Marcus wants to schedule a meeting this afternoon. Are you available to discuss our conversation from last night?" Grace's response came quickly. "Absolutely. 2 p.m. work for you?" At exactly 2 o'clock, Grace arrived at Pinnacle Marketing dressed in professional attire that struck Emily as somehow different from her previous visit. She carried the same worn portfolio, but her demeanor had shifted from hopeful gratitude to confident competence. Emily escorted Grace to the small conference room, where Marcus was waiting with a stack of folders and his practiced expression of creative authority. "Miss Park, thank you for coming in. I wanted to discuss the specifics of our collaboration and get you started with background information on our key accounts." Grace settled into her chair with a kind of relaxed confidence that Emily recognized but had never seen from her before. "Before we discuss specific projects, I'd like to clarify a few things about working arrangements and compensation." Marcus looked mildly surprised by Grace's directness but maintained his professional smile. "Of course, what questions do you have?" "I've done some research on current market rates for the type of work we discussed, and I wanted to ensure we're aligned on fair compensation for the scope of these projects." Emily watched the interaction with fascination. Grace's entire approach had transformed overnight. Instead of grateful acceptance of whatever terms Marcus offered, she was positioning herself as a professional equal, negotiating fair compensation. "Well," said Marcus, his smile becoming slightly strained, "as we discussed, these are ongoing retainer arrangements rather than per-project fees, which allows for more predictable income on your end." "I understand the retainer concept," Grace replied smoothly. "However, I want to ensure the retainer rates reflect the actual time investment required for quality strategic work. For example, comprehensive social media strategy development for a client like Henderson Industries typically requires 15 to 20 hours per week of focused work." Emily felt a thrill of recognition. Grace was using information Emily had provided to negotiate from a position of knowledge rather than desperation. Marcus's expression shifted from mild surprise toward visible irritation. "Ms. Park, I think there might be some misunderstanding about the scope of these projects. We're looking for consistent, efficient management rather than comprehensive strategy overhaul." "I see," Grace said thoughtfully. "Can you help me understand what consistent management means in practical terms?" Emily watched Marcus struggle to explain work he had never actually performed himself. He relied on vague phrases about maintaining current success and efficient execution, while Grace asked increasingly specific questions about client expectations, performance metrics, and deliverable timelines. Finally, Grace turned to Emily with a perfectly innocent expression. "Emily, since you've been coordinating these accounts, perhaps you could help clarify the typical workflow and time investment required." Emily felt every muscle in her body tense. This was the moment she had both dreaded and anticipated, the moment when her unofficial expertise would either be acknowledged or she would be forced to perpetuate the fiction of her own invisibility. She looked at Marcus, whose expression had shifted from irritation to something approaching alarm. "Emily handles administrative coordination," Marcus said quickly. "Scheduling, basic communication, that sort of thing." Grace maintained her innocent expression while addressing Emily directly. "Still, you must have insight into how much time these accounts typically require for proper management." Emily felt a moment of perfect clarity. She could continue protecting Marcus's fiction and her own job security, or she could finally acknowledge her own professional capabilities. The Henderson Industries account, Emily said carefully, requires approximately 12 to 15 hours per week for strategic social media management, including content planning, community engagement, performance analysis, and monthly strategy adjustments based on analytics data. Marcus's face had gone pale. Emily, I think Miss Park is asking about coordination time, not strategic work. Actually, Grace said pleasantly, I'm very interested in understanding the full scope of strategic work currently being performed. Emily, do you happen to have performance data for these accounts? Emily looked directly at Marcus, whose expression had shifted from alarm to something approaching panic. I maintain comprehensive analytics reports for all our social media accounts. Would you like to see the Henderson Industries performance data from the past quarter? Before Marcus could respond, Emily was already opening her laptop and pulling up the detailed analytics dashboard that she had created and maintained for Henderson Industries. The data showed consistent growth in engagement, follower acquisition, and conversion metrics, results that had directly led to Henderson expanding their contract with Pinnacle Marketing. Grace studied the data with obvious professional appreciation. This is excellent strategic work. The content planning shows sophisticated understanding of audience behavior, and the engagement metrics indicate really effective community management. Emily felt a flush of professional pride she hadn't experienced in years. Thank you. I've been working to optimize their posting schedule based on audience activity patterns, and we've seen significant improvement in organic reach. Marcus was staring at Emily as if seeing her for the first time. Emily, how did you learn to do analytics reporting?
I taught myself, Emily said simply. The accounts needed proper tracking, and I wanted to ensure we could demonstrate value to our clients. Grace leaned back in her chair with a satisfied expression. Mr. Thompson, I think I now understand the scope of work we're discussing. Based on what I'm seeing, these accounts are already receiving professional-level strategic management. Are you looking for me to replicate this existing work or to collaborate with your current strategist? The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus appeared to be processing the realization that his administrative assistant had been performing senior-level marketing work for months, while Grace waited for an answer to a question that exposed the true nature of his original proposal. Finally, Marcus cleared his throat. I think perhaps we should schedule a follow-up meeting to discuss project scope in more detail. Grace smiled pleasantly. That would be perfect. Emily, would you be available for that discussion as well? Since you have such comprehensive knowledge of these accounts, your input would be invaluable. Emily felt a moment of pure, unexpected joy. I'd be happy to participate in strategic discussions about our clients' needs. As Grace gathered her portfolio and prepared to leave, she turned to Emily with genuine warmth. Thank you for sharing your expertise. It's clear these clients are in excellent hands. After Grace left, Marcus stood in the conference room for a long moment, staring at Emily's laptop screen where Henderson Industries analytics data was still displayed. Emily? He said finally. We need to talk. But as Emily prepared for what she assumed would be a difficult conversation with Marcus about her expanded role, she had no idea that Grace was about to make a discovery that would reveal a connection between them so profound and unexpected that it would not only change their professional partnership, but also Emily's understanding of her own family history. That evening, Emily found herself back at Murphy's Diner, but this time she was not alone. Grace had texted immediately after leaving Pinnacle Marketing, asking if they could meet to discuss what had happened in the conference room and plan their next steps. Emily arrived first again, choosing the same booth they had occupied 3 nights earlier. The familiar cracked vinyl seats and strong coffee felt like a refuge after the day's emotional intensity. She was still processing Marcus's reaction to her unexpected display of professional competence and the way Grace had orchestrated the entire interaction to expose the true nature of the work Emily had been performing. Grace arrived looking energized rather than tired, her eyes bright with the kind of excitement that comes from executing a successful plan. That, Grace said, sliding into the booth, was absolutely brilliant. Emily felt heat rise in her cheeks. I can't believe I actually did that. I've never spoken up like that before.
You didn't just speak up, you demonstrated your professional capabilities in a way that made it impossible for Marcus to continue pretending you're just a receptionist. Did you see his face when you pulled up those analytics? Emily laughed despite her nervousness. He looked like he was seeing me for the first time. Because he was, Grace said seriously. Emily, what you showed me today was senior-level marketing strategy work. The analytics alone represent hours of sophisticated analysis, and the performance improvements you've achieved are genuinely impressive. They ordered coffee and settled into discussing the practical implications of the afternoon's events. Grace had already begun researching potential clients who might be interested in their combined services, while Emily was grappling with the realization that she might actually be capable of working independently rather than remaining trapped in her current situation. I keep waiting for the fear to kick in. I should be terrified about potentially leaving a steady job, but instead, I feel energized. That's because you finally got to use your actual skills instead of hiding them. It's like being allowed to stretch after being cramped in a small space for too long. As they talked, Grace pulled out her phone to show Emily some potential client prospects she had identified. She scrolled through her research notes, then paused, her expression shifting from excitement to confusion. Emily, can I ask you something personal? Of course. You mentioned your family is from Phoenix. What's your mother's maiden name? Emily felt a flutter of confusion at this seemingly random question. Rodriguez is actually my mother's name. I kept it after my parents divorced when I was 12. My father's name was Miller. Why? Grace stared at her phone screen, then looked up at Emily with an expression of shock. Emily Miller? Well, Emily Rodriguez Miller, technically, but I dropped the Miller part in college. Grace, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost. Grace set her phone down carefully, her hands trembling slightly. Emily, I think I need to show you something, but I want to prepare you. This is going to sound impossible. Emily felt her pulse quicken. What kind of something? Grace turned her phone toward Emily, displaying what appeared to be a family photo. The image showed a young woman who looked remarkably like Grace, standing next to a man Emily didn't recognize, both of them holding a toddler. This is a photo my mother kept in her jewelry box until she died 5 years ago. The woman in the photo is my aunt, my mother's younger sister. Emily studied the photo more carefully, feeling a strange sense of recognition she couldn't explain. The woman did look like Grace, but there was something else familiar about her features. I don't understand. Why are you showing me this? Grace took a deep breath. Because the man in the photo is named David Miller, and according to the writing on the back, the little girl they're holding is named Emily. Emily felt the world tilt sideways. That's impossible. My father's name was David Miller, but... Emily, Grace said gently, I think the woman in this photo might be your mother. Emily stared at the image, her mind struggling to process what Grace was suggesting. The toddler in the photo had the same dark hair Emily remembered from her own childhood pictures, and there was something about the woman's smile that seemed eerily familiar. But that would mean... Emily began, then stopped as the implications hit her. It would mean we're cousins, Grace finished quietly. That's impossible. My mother never mentioned having a sister, and I've never heard of you or your mother. Grace nodded with obvious sympathy for Emily's shock. My mother really talked about her family. She left Phoenix when she was 18 years old after some kind of family conflict, and she never looked back. I only learned I had an aunt when I was going through my mother's belongings after she passed away.
Emily struggled to reconcile this information with everything she thought she knew about her own family history. Her mother had always been vague about her past, claiming her family had been complicated and that she preferred to focus on building their own life rather than dwelling on old relationships. "What was your mother's name?" Emily asked. "Linda Park, but her maiden name was Rodriguez." Emily felt her breath catch. "Rodriguez, like my mother." Grace nodded. "Emily, I think our mothers were sisters, which would make us first cousins." They sat in stunned silence for several minutes, both trying to process the magnitude of this revelation.
Emily studied the photo more carefully, looking for details that might confirm or contradict Grace's theory. "The timing would work," Emily said slowly. "This looks like it was taken around 1998 or 1999, which would be about the right time period. And I do remember my parents being happy when I was very young, before everything fell apart." Grace leaned forward intently. "What happened between your parents?" Emily had rarely discussed her family history with anyone, but something about the evening's revelations made her want to share details she had kept private for years. "My father left when I was 12. One day he was there, the next day he was just gone. My mother never explained why, just said that sometimes adults make choices that are hard for children to understand." Grace's expression grew increasingly sad as Emily continued. "My mother became really withdrawn after he left. She worked constantly, never dated anyone else, and avoided talking about the past. She died in a car accident when I was in college, so I never got answers to any of my questions about our family." Grace reached across the table and touched Emily's hand. "I'm so sorry. Losing a parent without getting closure about family history must have been incredibly difficult." Emily nodded, feeling emotions she had buried for years beginning to surface. "I always wondered why we didn't have extended family, why there were no aunts or uncles or cousins at holidays. My mother always said it was just the two of us against the world." "My mother said almost exactly the same thing," Grace said softly. "She raised me alone too, and whenever I asked about grandparents or other family, she would say that sometimes families break apart and you have to create your own." Emily studied the photo again, this time looking for resemblances she might have missed. The woman's bone structure was indeed similar to what Emily remembered of her mother, and there was something about her posture that seemed familiar. "Grace," Emily said slowly, "do you have any other photos or information about your aunt?" Grace nodded and began scrolling through her phone. "I found a few more things when I was going through my mother's belongings. She kept a small box of mementos that I almost threw away before I realized what they were." She showed Emily several more photos, images of two young women who were clearly sisters, laughing together at what appeared to be family gatherings. In some photos, they looked remarkably similar. In others, their differences were more pronounced, but the family resemblance was unmistakable. "This is them in high school," Grace said, pointing to a photo of two teenagers in graduation caps and gowns. "My mother is on the left, and I think your mother is on the right." Emily stared at the photo with growing certainty. The young woman on the right had the same smile Emily remembered from her childhood, the same way of tilting her head slightly when posed for pictures. "That's her," Emily whispered. "That's definitely my mother." Grace pulled out one more item, a handwritten letter that appeared to have been read and reread many times based on the wear along the fold lines. "I found this with the photos. It's from your mother to mine, dated about 6 months before your father left." Emily took the letter with trembling hands and began to read her mother's familiar handwriting. "Linda, I know you said you never wanted to hear from me again after I chose David for family harmony, but I need you to know that I think about you every day. Emily asks about aunts and cousins sometimes, and it breaks my heart that I can't tell her about her wonderful Aunt Linda and cousin Gracie. David and I are having problems, serious ones that I don't think we can overcome. If something happens to our marriage, I want you to know that my choice to support him during the family conflict doesn't mean I stopped loving you. I was young and thought I had to choose sides, but I realize now that I should have fought harder to keep our family together. Emily deserves to know her cousin. If you're willing, maybe we could find a way to reconnect, for their sake, if not for ours. All my love, Maria." Emily read the letter twice, tears streaming down her face. "She wanted us to know each other. She was planning to reach out to your mother."
Grace was crying too. My mother kept this letter for 15 years and never responded. I think she regretted that choice for the rest of her life. Emily looked up from the letter, her mind reeling with the implications of everything they had discovered. Grace, we're not just colleagues who found each other by chance. We're family. We were meant to know each other. Grace nodded, wiping her eyes. And we found each other anyway, despite our mother's inability to reconcile their differences. They sat together in the diner booth, processing the magnitude of what they had uncovered. The professional partnership they had been planning felt like something much more significant. Not just two women helping each other escape workplace exploitation, but family members finally finding their way back to each other. There is something else, Grace said eventually. Something that makes our meeting even more remarkable than you might realize. Emily looked at her questioningly. The reason I was at Pinnacle Marketing in the first place wasn't just because Marcus contacted me for freelance work. I had been specifically looking for opportunities in your building because I'd been tracing my family history and I knew my aunt had worked somewhere in that area of the city. Emily felt chills run down her arms. You're saying you were looking for me? Not consciously, Grace admitted, but I'd been researching companies in that neighborhood hoping to find someone who might have known Maria Rodriguez Miller. When Marcus's opportunity came up, I took it partly because it would give me a chance to ask people in the building if they had heard of her. Emily stared at Grace in amazement. So you were already searching for my mother when we met? Yes. And then, when you told me your full name and mentioned your mother's maiden name, I started wondering if it was possible we were connected. But I didn't want to say anything until I was certain. Emily shook her head in wonder at the series of coincidences that had brought them together. If Marcus hadn't decided to exploit both of us, we might never have met. Or if you hadn't been brave enough to warn me about his practices. Your decision to speak up didn't just save me from a bad work situation. It led us back to each other.
Emily felt a sense of rightness settle over her, as if puzzle pieces she hadn't even known were missing had suddenly clicked into place. Grace, I want to ask you something, and I hope it doesn't sound presumptuous. Anything. Would you be interested in building our business partnership as family, not just colleagues? I know we're still getting to know each other, but I feel like we have a foundation that goes deeper than just shared professional goals. Grace's smile was radiant. Emily, I can't think of anything I'd like more. Lily is going to be thrilled to learn she has a cousin. Emily felt a surge of joy at the mention of Grace's daughter, her own cousin by extension. I'd love to meet her. She's been asking when she could meet my new friend. I think she's going to be excited to learn you're actually family. As they prepared to leave the diner, Emily felt like she was stepping into a completely different life than the one she had woken up to that morning. Not only had she finally found the courage to acknowledge her professional capabilities, but she had also discovered family she had never known existed. Grace, Emily said as they stood outside the diner, "Thank you for finding me." "Thank you for being brave enough to let yourself be found," Grace replied, hugging her tightly. As Emily and Grace began planning their new business partnership as family, they had no idea that their newfound connection would soon attract the attention of someone from their shared past, someone who had been searching for them both for 15 years, and whose arrival would reveal the final, most shocking truth about why their mothers had really been separated. 2 weeks after their life-changing discovery at Murphy's Diner, Emily and Grace had fallen into a comfortable routine of family dinners, business planning sessions, and the kind of easy companionship that felt like they had known each other their entire lives. Emily had met Lily, who had immediately declared Emily the best cousin ever and insisted on showing her every drawing, dance move, and interesting rock in her collection. Their business plans were progressing rapidly. Grace's design skills, combined with Emily's strategic marketing expertise, had already attracted 3 potential clients, and they were preparing to officially launch their partnership.
Emily had given Marcus her 2 weeks' notice, a conversation that had been surprisingly unclimactic. He had seemed almost relieved to have his exploitation exposed and resolved. It was during one of their evening planning sessions at Grace's apartment that everything changed again. Emily was sitting on Grace's living room floor, surrounded by a portfolio of samples and client proposals, while Grace worked at her computer updating their joint website. Lily had fallen asleep on the couch after insisting on helping by organizing their business cards into elaborate patterns. "Emily," Grace said suddenly, her voice strange and tense, "I just got an email that I think you need to see." Emily looked up from the marketing materials she was reviewing. "What kind of email?" Grace turned her laptop screen toward Emily, displaying a message that made Emily's heart stop. The email was from someone named Patricia Williams, and the subject line read, "Looking for Maria Rodriguez Miller and Linda Rodriguez Park." Emily read the message with growing shock. "Dear Miss Park, I hope this message finds you well. I obtained your contact information through your business website, and I'm writing because I believe you may be the daughter of Linda Rodriguez Park, who would have been my stepdaughter. My name is Patricia Williams, and I was married to Roberto Rodriguez from 1985 until his death in 2010. But before he passed, he made me promise to find you girls and tell you the truth about what happened to your family. I've been searching for Maria and Linda for over 15 years, following a family tragedy that separated us all. I have important information about your family history that I believe both you and Maria's daughter, Emily, deserve to know. If you're willing to speak with me, please contact me at the number below. I understand this message may come as a shock, but there are things about your family's past that were never properly explained, and I believe it's time for the truth to come to light. Sincerely, Patricia Williams." Emily stared at the email, her mind struggling to process this new revelation. "Grace, who is Patricia Williams?" "I have no idea," Grace said, her voice shaky. "But if she was married to our grandfather—" "We had a grandfather? My mother never mentioned any grandparents." Grace had no idea either. She always said her father had died when she was young and that her mother had remarried someone who didn't want contact with the family. Emily read the email again, focusing on the phrase, "family tragedy that separated us all." "Grace, what do you think happened?" Before Grace could answer, her phone rang. The caller ID showed an unknown number with a local area code. Grace looked at Emily questioningly. "Should I answer it?" Emily nodded, her curiosity overriding her apprehension. Grace put the phone on speaker. "Hello? Is this Grace Park?" The voice belonged to an older woman, probably in her 70s, with a slight accent Emily couldn't identify. "Yes, this is Grace. My name is Patricia Williams. I sent you an email a few minutes ago about your mother, Linda. I hope you don't mind me calling, but I've been waiting so long to find you both that I couldn't wait for email responses." Grace looked at Emily with wide eyes. "Mrs. Williams, I have your email open right now, and actually, Emily is here with me. Emily Rodriguez Miller." There was a long pause on the other end of the line, followed by what sounded like crying. "Emily. Oh my God, Emily, I've been looking for you for so long." Emily leaned closer to the phone. "Mrs. Williams, I'm sorry, but I don't understand who you are or how you know about me." "Of course you don't, sweetheart. Your mother's made sure of that." Patrician's voice was heavy with old sadness. "Can we meet? There's so much I need to tell you both, and it's not the kind of conversation that should happen over the phone." Emily and Grace exchanged glances, both clearly torn between curiosity and caution about meeting a stranger who claimed knowledge of their family history. "Mrs. Williams, can you give us some basic information about how you knew our mothers? We're trying to understand the situation." "I was married to your grandfather, Roberto Rodriguez, for 25 years. He died of a heart attack in 2010, but before he passed, he made me promise to find you girls and tell you the truth about what happened to your family." Patricia paused, and we could hear her taking a shaky breath. "Your mothers didn't have a simple family conflict, girls. What happened to your family was my fault, and I've been trying to find a way to make amends ever since." Emily felt her pulse quicken. "What do you mean it was your fault?" "I need to tell you this in person, with documents and photos that will help explain everything. Would you be willing to meet me tomorrow? I can come to whatever's convenient for you." Emily looked at Grace, who nodded slowly. Their curiosity had officially overridden their caution. "We could meet at Murphy's Diner on 5th Street. It's public and comfortable for conversation." "Thank you," Patricia said, her relief obvious. "Would 11 in the morning work?" After confirming the details and ending the call, Emily and Grace sat in stunned silence, trying to process this latest development in their increasingly complex family story. "What do you think she meant about it being her fault?" Grace asked. Emily shook her head. "I have no idea, but I'm starting to think there's a lot more to our family history than either of our mothers ever told us." The next morning, Emily and Grace arrived at Murphy's Diner 15 minutes early, choosing a booth in the back corner where they could have privacy for what promised to be an emotional conversation. Emily felt like she was living in someone else's life. 2 weeks ago, she had been an invisible receptionist with no known family beyond her deceased mother, and now she was preparing to meet a step-grandmother she had never heard of. At exactly 11 o'clock, an elegant woman in her early 70s entered the diner. She was well-dressed, but not flashy, with silver hair pulled back in a neat bun, and the kind of bearing that suggested she had been beautiful when she was younger. She looked around the restaurant uncertainly until Emily waved from our booth. Patricia Williams approached the table with obvious nervousness, carrying a large manila envelope and a small suitcase that seemed too formal for a casual meeting. "Emily and Grace, you both look so much like your mothers."
She slid into the booth across from them, her eyes filling with tears as she studied their faces. "I can't believe I'm finally meeting you. Roberto would have been so happy to know you were together." Emily felt an unexpected surge of emotion at hearing about her grandfather from someone who had loved him. "Mrs. Williams, can you tell us about our grandfather? We don't know anything about him." Patricia's expression grew sad. "Roberto was a wonderful man who made one terrible mistake that destroyed his family, and I was the mistake." Grace leaned forward intently. "What do you mean?" Patricia opened the manila envelope and pulled out several old photographs. The first image showed a handsome man in his 40s standing next to two teenage girls who Emily immediately recognized as younger versions of their mothers. "This is Roberto with Maria and Linda when they were 17 and 15, Patricia said. "This was taken about 6 months before I ruined their lives." Emily studied the photo, seeing happiness and family closeness that she had never heard described in her mother's rare mentions of her childhood. "They look so happy," Grace said softly. "They were," Patricia replied. "Roberto was a single father who had raised the girls alone after their mother died when Linda was 8. He worked 2 jobs to support them, but he made sure they had everything they needed. Maria was planning to go to college, and Linda was an exceptional student despite being younger." Patricia pulled out another photo, this one showing Roberto with the much younger version of herself. "This is when Roberto and I first started dating. I was 28, he was 45. The girls were 18 and 16. Emily began to understand where the story was heading, and she felt a sense of dread. "I was young and selfish. I thought I was in love, but I was really just infatuated with the idea of being rescued by an older, established man. Roberto was grieving his wife's death and lonely, and I took advantage of that." Grace asked the question Emily was afraid to voice. "What happened?"
Patricia's expression became barely audible. I got pregnant. Emily felt the pieces of a tragic puzzle beginning to form a clear picture. And Roberto chose you over his daughters? Not exactly. Roberto wanted to find a way to make everything work. He proposed marriage and wanted the girls to be part of our family. But she paused, clearly struggling with shame about events from decades earlier. I told him the girls would have to choose between accepting me and his new baby or finding their own way. Grace's voice was sharp with anger. You made him choose between you and his daughters. Patricia nodded miserably. I was threatened by their closeness to their father, and I was afraid they would turn him against me. I convinced Roberto that the girls were adults who needed to become independent, and that our new baby deserved a father who could focus completely on his new family. Emily felt sick to her stomach. So he chose you. He chose me, and I made sure the girls knew they weren't welcome in our home. Maria tried to maintain a relationship with Roberto for a few months, but I made it so uncomfortable that she eventually stopped coming around. Patricia reached into her suitcase and pulled out a thick folder of documents. Linda left for college and never came back. Roberto and I were married, and I had a son, your Uncle Thomas, who is now 35 years old. Emily stared at Patricia with growing horror and fascination. You destroyed their family because you were jealous of teenage girls? Yes, Patricia said simply, and I've regretted it every day since. Roberto never stopped grieving the loss of his daughters. He tried to find them over the years, but they had both changed their names and moved away. When he was dying, he made me promise to locate you and Grace and tell you the truth about what happened. Grace's voice was tight with controlled emotion. Why should we believe anything you're telling us? Patricia opened the folder and began spreading documents across the table. Because I have proof of everything I'm saying. Birth certificates, marriage licenses, letters Roberto wrote to your mothers that were returned unopened, private investigator reports from his attempts to find them. Emily picked up one of the letters, recognizing her mother's name on the envelope, in handwriting she didn't recognize, but assumed belonged to her grandfather. The letter had been marked "Return to Sender" in her mother's handwriting. He never stopped trying to reconnect with them, Patricia said, and after he died, I realized I had to complete the mission he couldn't finish. I hired private investigators to find you both, but it took years because you had both moved multiple times and changed names. Grace looked up from the documents she was reviewing. How did you finally find us? Your business website, Patricia admitted. When you started advertising your services online, the combination of your names and professional backgrounds made it possible for my investigator to confirm your identities. Emily felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of what Patricia was revealing. So our mother's family conflict wasn't really between them, it was both of them being cut off from their father because of you. Patricia nodded sadly. And they probably blamed each other for not fighting harder to maintain the relationship with Roberto. The letter you found from your mother to Grace's mother suggests they were both carrying guilt about the situation. Grace leaned back in the booth, processing everything they had learned. Mrs. Williams, why are you telling us this now? What do you want from us? Patricia's expression grew hopeful for the first time during their conversation. I want to give you the family Roberto always hoped you would have. Your Uncle Thomas knows about you and wants to meet you. Roberto left inheritance money for both of your mothers, and since they passed away, it belongs to you. She pulled out 2 envelopes from her suitcase, but more importantly, I want to give you the truth about your family history, and I want to apologize for the choices I made that kept you from knowing each other and your grandfather. Emily stared at the envelope with her name on it, feeling like she was in a dream. Mrs. Williams, this is a lot to process. I understand. I don't expect forgiveness, and I don't expect you to welcome me into your lives. I just wanted you to know that you come from a family that loved you, and that the separation wasn't because of anything your mothers did wrong.
Grace looked up at Emily, clearly seeking guidance about how to respond to Patricia's revelations and requests. Emily took a deep breath, trying to organize her thoughts about everything they had learned. "Mrs. Williams, can I ask you something? Anything. Do you think our mothers might have found their way back to each other if they had known the whole truth about what happened with our grandfather?" Patricia's eyes filled with tears again. "I think they might have. I think they both carried guilt about not being able to maintain their relationship with Roberto, and they probably blamed themselves and each other instead of understanding that I was the one who created the situation that made it impossible." Emily looked at Grace, who nodded slightly. "Mrs. Williams, we're going to need time to process everything you've told us, but we appreciate you coming forward with the truth." "Of course," Patricia said. "I'll leave my contact information, and you can reach out when you're ready, if you ever are." As Patricia prepared to leave, she paused and looked at both Emily and Grace with obvious emotion. "I want you to know that Roberto would have been so proud of both of you. He always believed his daughters would grow up to be strong, intelligent women who could overcome any obstacle, and he was right." After Patricia left, Emily and Grace sat in silence for several minutes, both trying to process the morning's revelations about their family history. "Emily, Grace, how do you feel about everything she told us?" Emily considered the question carefully. "Angry about what she did to our family, but also grateful that we finally know the truth and relieved that our mothers didn't abandon their father by choice." Grace nodded. "It explains why both of our mothers seem to carry so much sadness about their past." Emily picked up the envelope Patricia had left for her, feeling the weight of documents and what appeared to be a substantial amount of cash inside. "Grace, do you think we should meet our Uncle Thomas?" "I think I'd like to. We've already discovered that we're stronger as a family than we were apart. Maybe extending that to include other relatives would be positive." Emily smiled at Grace, feeling grateful for the series of coincidences and brave decisions that had brought them to this moment. "Grace, can I tell you something?" "Always." 2 weeks ago, I thought I was alone in the world with no real family and no professional future. Now I have a cousin, a business partner, a niece, and apparently an uncle and step-grandmother." Grace laughed. "And I thought finding steady freelance work was going to be the biggest change in my life this month." Emily raised her coffee cup in a mock toast. To family, professional partnerships, and the unexpected ways life can transform completely in a matter of weeks. Grace clinked her cup against Emily's, and to our mothers, who would have been amazed to see us together. As Emily and Grace celebrated their newfound understanding of their family history, they had no idea that their Uncle Thomas had been following Patricia's search for them and was about to arrive at Murphy's Diner with one final revelation that would complete the circle of their family's story in a way neither of them could have imagined. 6 months later, Emily stood in the conference room of Rodriguez Park Strategic Marketing, the company she and Grace had built from their initial conversation at Murphy's Diner. The walls displayed client testimonials, awards from local business organizations, and family photos that included their Uncle Thomas, Patricia, and Thomas's wife and 2 children, Emily and Grace's second cousins, who had welcomed them into the extended family with enthusiastic joy. The transformation in Emily's life felt so complete that she sometimes had trouble believing it was real. She wore professional attire that reflected her role as creative director and co-owner of a successful marketing firm, her confidence evident in the way she carried herself and spoke with clients. The invisible receptionist, who had once hidden her capabilities behind a pleasant smile, had evolved into a respected business leader who was known for innovative strategic thinking and genuine care for client success. Grace entered the conference room carrying the portfolio that had started their entire journey, now considerably thicker with examples of their collaborative work and client success stories. "Ready for the Henderson Industries presentation?"
Grace asked, settling into her chair at the conference table they had purchased with their first major client payment. Emily smiled at the irony. Henderson Industries, the account she had secretly managed while working for Marcus, had become their anchor client after Patricia helped them understand that Emily's work had been the primary reason for the account's success. Marcus had been forced to admit his deception to retain the client, but Henderson had chosen to follow Emily and Grace to their new firm. I still can't believe we're presenting a comprehensive rebranding strategy to a client I used to manage in secret, Emily said. Believe it, your strategic insights were always professional-level work. Now you're finally getting proper credit and compensation. Their presentation went smoothly, with the Henderson team approving their proposed brand evolution and timeline for implementation. As they packed up their materials, Emily felt the familiar satisfaction that came from doing work she loved with someone she trusted completely. Walking back to their office, they passed the building that housed Pinnacle Marketing. Emily glanced up at the windows where she had once spent her days feeling invisible and undervalued. Any regrets? Grace asked, noticing Emily's glance. Emily considered the question seriously. About leaving Pinnacle? None. About the years I spent there feeling stuck? I'm trying to think of them as preparation for what I'm doing now. Grace nodded thoughtfully. I keep thinking about what Patricia told us, about our mothers carrying guilt about their family situation. I don't want us to do the same thing about the time it took us to find each other. Emily appreciated Grace's perspective. Over the past 6 months, they had both worked to view their previous struggles as necessary experiences that had prepared them to appreciate and build the life they now shared. That evening, they gathered for their weekly family dinner at Thomas's house, a tradition that had developed naturally as they got to know their uncle and his family. Thomas had inherited his father's warmth and his sister's intelligence, and he had welcomed Emily and Grace into his life as if they had never been separated. Patricia was also present at these dinners, though the relationship between Emily and Grace remained complex. They had developed a cautious friendship based on shared love for Roberta's memory and appreciation for her honesty about past mistakes, but Emily suspected they would never fully overcome the knowledge of her role in their family's separation. During dinner, Lily announced that she had drawn a picture of the whole family for her school assignment about relatives. The drawing showed stick figures representing Emily, Grace, Thomas, his wife and children, and even Patricia, all holding hands under a large sun. Lily, this is beautiful. Can you tell me about everyone in the picture? Lily pointed to each figure with pride. That's you and Mommy and me and Uncle Thomas and Aunt Sarah and my cousins and Grandma Patricia. We're all together because families are supposed to be together. Emily felt tears prick her eyes at the simple wisdom of a 6-year-old who had internalized the lesson their adult relatives had taken decades to learn. Later that evening, after Lily had gone to bed and the family gathering was winding down, Emily found herself sitting on Thomas's back porch with Grace, both of them reflecting on how much their lives had changed. Emily, can I ask you something I've been thinking about? Of course. Do you think our mothers would have been proud of what we've built together? Emily considered the question, thinking about the letter they had found from her mother to Grace's mother, expressing hope that their daughters might someday know each other. I think, Emily said slowly, they would have been amazed that we not only found each other, but that we found each other in a way that allowed both of us to become the people we were capable of being. Grace nodded. I keep thinking about how your decision to warn me about Marcus's exploitation was really the moment that changed both of our lives. You chose to help someone else even though it might have put your own job at risk. Emily reflected on that evening at Murphy's Diner when she had first decided to speak up about Marcus's business practices. I think I was finally ready to stop being invisible. Meeting you gave me a reason to be brave. And meeting you gave me hope that I could build something better than just surviving from project to project. We sat in comfortable silence. both appreciating the quiet evening and the sense of belonging that had developed over months of shared work, family dinners, and the gradual construction of lives they had both thought were impossible. "Emily, can I tell you something I've never said out loud before?" Grace turned to give Emily her full attention. "For most of my adult life, I believed that some people were meant to lead interesting, successful lives, and others were meant to support those people from the background. I thought I was permanently assigned to the background." Emily paused, organizing thoughts she had been developing over the past several months of professional and personal growth. "But I've learned that the only thing keeping me in the background was my own fear of stepping forward. All the capabilities I thought I didn't have were actually skills I had developed but never acknowledged." Grace smiled with understanding. "I spent years believing that my value was determined by other people's willingness to hire me or validate my work. It never occurred to me that I could create my own validation by building something with someone who appreciated my contributions." Emily felt grateful for Grace's understanding of the transformation they had both experienced. "Do you think we would have found the courage to change our lives if we hadn't found each other?" Grace considered the question thoughtfully. "Maybe eventually, but I think it would have taken longer and been more difficult. Having family support made it possible to take risks that would have felt impossible alone." Emily nodded, thinking about how their business partnership had succeeded largely because they could support each other through the challenges of entrepreneurship while celebrating each other's successes without competition or jealousy. "Grace, I have a confession to make." Grace raised an eyebrow with mock concern. "Should I be worried?" "No, it's a good confession. I've been thinking about expanding our business to include training and consulting for other people who feel stuck in professional situations like we were." Grace's eyes lit up with interest. "Tell me more." Emily had been developing this idea for weeks, inspired by conversations with other professionals who seemed to be struggling with similar issues of undervaluation and professional invisibility. "I keep meeting people who have developed sophisticated skills in their current roles, but don't feel confident about marketing those skills independently. People who are doing senior-level work for junior-level recognition or have talents they've never had the opportunity to showcase professionally." Grace nodded with obvious enthusiasm. "That describes both of us perfectly 6 months ago." "Exactly. And I think our experience of discovering our own capabilities and building a successful partnership could be valuable for other people who are ready to make similar transitions." Grace leaned forward with the kind of excitement Emily had learned to associate with her cousin's best creative ideas. "Emily, that's brilliant. We could offer workshops on professional self-advocacy, portfolio development, maybe even partnership matching for people who have complementary skills."
Emily laughed at the perfect accuracy of Grace's suggestion. "I love it. That's exactly what we learned to do." As they continued discussing possibilities for expanding their business to include career development services, Emily realized that their success had given them not just personal and financial stability, but also the opportunity to help other people achieve similar transformations. "Grace," Emily said, "I think this expansion could be our way of honoring our mother's memory and our grandfather's belief in our potential." Grace's expression grew soft with emotion. By helping other people discover capabilities they didn't know they had? By helping other people step out of the background and into their own lives, Emily replied. As they prepared to leave Thomas's house, Patricia approached Emily with the careful manner she had maintained throughout their developing relationship. "Emily," Patricia said, "I wanted to thank you for including me in these family gatherings. I know my presence is complicated, but being part of your lives has meant more to me than I can express." Emily felt the mixture of gratitude and residual anger that still characterized her feelings toward Patricia. "Mrs. Williams, I appreciate your honesty about the past in your efforts to bring our family back together." Patricia nodded with understanding. "I hope that someday you and Grace might feel comfortable calling me Grandma Patricia, but I understand if that never feels right." Emily considered Patricia's request, thinking about the complexity of family relationships and the possibility of healing old wounds through current choices. "Patricia," Emily said, using her first name deliberately, "I think we're building something new together rather than trying to recreate what was lost. Maybe that's actually better." Patricia's eyes filled with tears of gratitude. "Thank you for giving me the chance to be part of what you're building." As Emily and Grace drove back to their respective homes, Emily reflected on the evening's conversations about business expansion, family relationships, and the ongoing process of building lives that felt authentic and satisfying. "Grace," Emily said as they stopped at a red light, "can I tell you the best part about everything that's happened?" "What's that?" Emily smiled at her cousin, business partner, and closest friend. 6 months ago, I thought success meant becoming invisible enough that people wouldn't notice my mistakes. Now I know success means becoming visible enough that people can appreciate my contributions." Grace reached over and squeezed Emily's hand. "And I thought success meant being grateful for any opportunity, no matter how exploitative. Now I know success means creating opportunities that value both of us appropriately." Emily felt a deep sense of satisfaction as she thought about their journey from that first meeting at Pinnacle Marketing to their current position as successful business owners and reconnected family members. "Grace," Emily said as they pulled into her driveway, "can I tell you the best part about everything that's happened?" "What's that?" Emily smiled at her cousin, business partner, and closest friend. 6 months ago, I thought success meant becoming invisible enough that people wouldn't notice my mistakes. Now I know success means becoming visible enough that people can appreciate my contributions." Grace reached over and squeezed Emily's hand. "And I thought success meant being grateful for any opportunity, no matter how exploitative. Now I know success means creating opportunities that value both of us appropriately." Emily felt a deep sense of satisfaction as she thought about their journey from that first meeting at Pinnacle Marketing to their current position as successful business owners and reconnected family members. "Grace," Emily said as they pulled into her driveway, "thank you for seeing me before I learned to see myself." Grace smiled with the warmth Emily had come to treasure over months of shared experiences. "Thank you for being brave enough to speak up when it mattered most." As Emily walked toward her apartment, she felt grateful for the series of coincidences, brave decisions, and family connections that had transformed her life from professional invisibility to meaningful success. But more than professional achievement, Emily treasured the knowledge that she was no longer alone in the world. She had found families she had never known existed, discovered capabilities she had hidden from herself, and built a life that felt genuinely her own rather than something she was simply enduring. Looking back at the car where Grace was waiting to make sure she got inside safely, Emily waved at her cousin with deep affection. Tomorrow they would continue building their business, planning their new career development programs, and strengthening the family connections that had given both of their lives new meaning and direction. 6 months ago, Emily Rodriguez had been a receptionist who believed her role in life was to remain invisible while supporting other people's success. Tonight, she was Emily Rodriguez, co-owner of a thriving marketing firm, beloved cousin and aunt, and someone who had learned that the most extraordinary transformations often begin with ordinary people finding the courage to step into their own lives. As she unlocked her apartment door, Emily smiled at the thought that sometimes the best stories are the ones where regular people discover they were never as ordinary as they believed themselves to be. Sometimes the most powerful change comes not from dramatic external circumstances, but from the simple decision to stop hiding your own capabilities from the world. And sometimes the family you've been searching for your entire life finds you exactly when you're brave enough to let yourself be found. The end.
Up next, 2 more incredible stories are waiting for you right on your screen. If you enjoyed this one, you won't want to miss these. Just click to watch and don't forget to subscribe.